It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And of course, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Today we are in Stratford, Ontario, and we're having a great time at Canada's Association of Farm Advisors meeting. This is a great day dedicated to farm management. I'll tell you what, there are issues that our industry is really facing. Heard a lot of kind of scary stuff here today from a policy perspective and some of the things that we need to be watching out for, from insurance to finance and a whole bunch of policy stuff as well. Today's show is brought to you by the Bossy Nagy Group, Chartered Accountants. We can help you surprise yourself. See how you can increase your bottom line. Find out more by going to bng-cpa.ca. So big thanks to Bossy Nagy Group for sponsoring RealAg Radio here at Canada's Association of Farm Advisors meeting. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to run through some slides we've been finding in our RealAgristudies market research as it applies to a lot of the people that are in this room. What are farmers looking at when it comes to learning and development? What is their financial outlook on the year ahead? And what are some of the policy issues that they feel are positive and negative when it comes to impacting their farm? Then at the back end of the show, what we're going to do is we're going to bring up not a farmer panel, that's other days. Today we have an advisor panel. That's right, this is going to be really cool. We've got Cate McCorquodale, who is partner with Monteith Ritsma Phillips. I think I got that right. Also Tom Blond, he's an accountant with Baker Tilly. We've got Ryan Parker, who's a consultant with Valco, focuses on land values and Ontario real estate. So we're going to talk about a number of different issues and we'll apply it to their areas of special expertise, I should say. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you have any feedback on today's show, what you can do is you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can find RealAgriculture across all the social media platforms, or you are more than welcome to call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue from the meeting here in Stratford.
Hey, Sandy.
Mike, nice to see you.
We're meeting next week, but I just wanted to ask, who would you recommend I talk to about financing my operating expenses this growing season?
Easy. Call CCGA. Their APP cash advances are flexible and can save you thousands in financing costs. You can get up to $250,000 interest-free, and anything over that is below prime.
Great idea. I'll call them tomorrow.
And check out ccga.ca.
Cash advances are made under the Government of Canada's Advance Payments Program.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com, and what an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch WheatPete's Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. We're at the CAFA meeting here in Stratford, Ontario. It's a beautiful day. All day we've been meeting here, looking out the window and watching people golf all day. This is like immense discipline that it takes to sit in this meeting all day. Got a great audience here. What we're going to do is we are going to go through some slides. Oh, there we go. And we're going to talk about some of the things that are happening in the agriculture industry and as it applies to the people that you're consulting with, people that you are talking to on a daily basis in your meeting as farm advisors, and that is the farmer and rancher. So we're going to look at the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index here, and this is something that we do at RealAgristudies, which is the market research arm of Real Agriculture. Myself and my partner, Justin Funk of AgriStudies, who's based out of Guelph, not too far down the road. We started putting this together in September of 2022. We've mirrored it after the CME Purdue Ag Barometer in the US, trying to compare and contrast what's happening in Canada versus the US. And so this was the last one we did was in April. And I guess to start off, we look at current farm financial performance here on the left is the first bank of bars that you do see there. Remember that the scale here is 0 to 200, okay? 100 is neutral. So you can see there's a lot of bars below 100. Farmers not feeling very good about the current environment out there on finances and a number of different items. So some things to point out here that I think are important. In the first bank current farm financial performance, we're currently at an 85. We've really sort of bottomed out, I think. We're asking farmers here, how do you feel about your farm financial performance today versus 12 months ago? Okay? And really east and west, there's not a lot of difference. Both regions really center around that 85. For the first time in the history of us doing this, actually future farm financial performance is higher than the current. So when it comes to future farm financial performance, the second bank of numbers on the graph, for those of you that are here in attendance, it was an 87, so just barely above. So how do I feel about my future farm financial performance 12 months from now compared to today? Okay, so both below 100, slightly, but both in the negative. The number here that really kind of honestly blows my mind a little bit, or the bank that does blow my mind, is this one. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 4 here. That's the future of the Canadian ag industry. What we're asking farmers there is, in the next 5 years, will we have widespread good times or widespread bad times? In January, farmers said 56. That's very negative. Especially when you think what we've come off of, especially in Eastern Canada. You think about here in Central Canada and Eastern Canada, how good the crops have been, where the markets have been. Farmers have made a lot of money. They may not tell you that, but they have. To have that kind of a negative outlook going 5 years out really, really does, I think we're being a little bit overly negative. In January, we bumped up to 81, which is, I think, a little bit more where historically that number has been, if you look at the graph. One of the pieces of data that has not really moved at all is my confidence in making farm investments. It was tied for an all-time high at 58. It really hasn't moved that much, even with interest rates increasing over that time period and profitability being quite good, right? So again, in Eastern Canada, where there has been some money made, a little bit different than some of the drought conditions that Western Canada has faced, farmers still not feeling right now is a good time to make farm investments. Doesn't mean they haven't made farm investments, but it's not necessarily a good time to make farm investments. So how do farmers look at 2024? We ask them, when it comes to the coming crop year versus last year, do you feel there is more risk, less risk, or risk is about the same? And you can see 76% of growers saying this year is more risky than last year. Kind of makes sense based on what's happened to the market, really roll over since last July. There's been a lot of pullback, a lot of increased concern still with things like inputs and fuel. Even though some of those have come down, farmers seeing a little bit more volatility. The market's not necessarily just a hockey stick that is going straight up. So if we think it's more risky, do you have a formal risk management plan? And here's where things get a little bit interesting. So do you have a formal risk management plan in place for your farm? Well, not a lot. The group that does is farmers with over $5 million in revenue. 70% of them saying, hey, I have a formal risk management plan. And it goes down from there. Okay? So even though we've identified that there's more risk in the market, I don't necessarily have a formal risk or a risk management plan on my farm. And this was a survey that we did from January. So farm size has an impact on whether they do or they don't. What about by age? The older you are, the higher the chances are that you have a formal risk management plan. Okay, whoever you define that. Interestingly enough, the group that is the most optimistic about their current and future farm financial performance is farmers under the age of 35, but also the least likely to have a risk management plan. Okay, it seems to be a bit of a gap there. To dive into policy a little bit, one of the things that Tyler mentioned about how Tyler McCann from Cate was presenting before me here, for those of you that aren't here, he talked about how policy plays it needs to be a little bit more of a focus. It has a real impact. And I like how we talked about how, all the time I'm interviewing market analysts, talking about the risks that are out there and how you can, manage against it and steer through it and try to maximize your profitability or maybe minimize your return. Policies are really kind of the same. What we did is we came up with a list of policies that are out there that are impacting agriculture, and we asked farmers on a scale of -2 to +2 how they felt in terms of it impacting their farm. So this is the gap analysis, okay? So negative means it's a negative impact, positive means it's a positive impact. The most positive impact that Canadian farmers see right now from a policy perspective is, and it surprised me, was investment in plant breeding. Maybe not a surprise. The most negative policy impact was the sustainable ag strategy and other environmental policies. I don't think that's going to be a shocker for anybody that's in the room. One of the ones that really does, it kind of confirmed sort of a feeling that I had, was how farmers feel in Canada about biofuels and the clean fuel standard. Okay? This is something the federal government rolled out and implemented July 1st of 2023, if my memory is correct. This is really why we're seeing all of the renewable diesel capacity being built in Western Canada. There's a lot of interest in the growth of ethanol here in Ontario because that's where all the corn is grown. Of course, farmers neutral. This is a significant difference than if we did this analysis and asked farmers in Iowa. Okay? This is one of the areas where American farmers and Canadian farmers really go separate directions when they look at a certain policy. And here's what's really interesting. This asks the same question, but it divides it by region. And so if and I've run this by numerous people, politicians, industry people alike, and when it comes to biofuels and the clean fuel standard, Western Canadian farmers, I think it's like a turquoise blue, or maybe like a baby blue, like Blue Jays blue, they're positive at 0.08, barely positive. It's the Eastern Canadian farmer that actually sees they see a negative impact on their farms. Everybody I've talked to thinks it would be the reverse. So the biofuel lobby has some significant work to do in Canada when it comes to trying to explain some of the benefits. Other than that, you can kind of see where East and West do. Western Canadian farmers a little bit more positive when it comes to plant breeding. Securing free trade agreements. Western Canada more positive. Although I would argue, as trade reliant as our country is, the fact that it was a 0.5, I think we have some explaining to do when it comes to the benefits of trade to a lot of our farmers. And before you say, well, it's the bias of the supply management sector that's dragging that number down, it's actually not. It doesn't make that big of a difference. It actually only jumps that number to I think a 0.6. Okay, so there's some work to do in that camp as well. For the people that are in the audience, are you surprised by the sustainable ag strategy and environmental policies being the most negative? Does that surprise anybody? No, it does not. Okay. We're going to take a break here. We are broadcasting from the CAFA meeting in Stratford, Ontario, and we're going to be back here on RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, SiriusXM.
Join us for the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, August 19th to 22nd in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Spend time networking on the trade show floor, hear from keynote speakers, and take in breakout sessions designed to increase profit, manage your rangeland, and navigate trends. Get up close to advanced techniques and hands-on demos, and kicking it all off is Lamley's Bull event. Proud, sustainable, and innovative, we are beef. Registration is now open. Visit CanadianBeefIndustryConference.com for full details and to register.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. We are broadcasting from the CAFA meeting here in Stratford, Ontario, in the beautiful Stratford Country Club. It is, like I said, requires a lot of discipline to look out these windows of this meeting room and watch the Ladies League tee off all day, and wishing that some of us were out there for sure. So we're going to panel coming up here in a little bit, but what we're going to do is dive into a little bit more in terms of how farmers view some of the topics that farm advisors are having to deal with. And next we're going to look at participation in learning and development, okay? So we asked farmers, have you participated in any learning and development activities, workshops, webinars, seminars, conferences in the last 12 months? 68% of farmers said they had, okay? When we asked them, okay, so what are the categories of which you have participated in that kind of learning? And it shouldn't be really a surprise to anybody, but production agronomy and marketing, the top things that farmers are trying to get some learning on. What has been evidently quite low is human resources, okay? It was the lowest of all of the specific categories that we had asked about. I think this is one of the areas where I think we really need to do some work. Now, when I talk about that, a lot of times the audience says, well, I don't have any employees, only family members. What the heck do you think human resources is? They're the hardest employees to work with, right? So we got some work to do there. And if you talk to any sort of farmer or rancher, it's the production and the market, those are the things that got them into the business. Those are the things that they love to do. So it's no surprise that those are the number one things that they chose. When we look at learning and development, though, and we cut it down by things like farm size based on revenue, okay, the larger the farm, the higher the probability you are participating in learning and development, okay? The smaller you are, the less likely. When we look at the larger farms, and I will say this, through our research, farms over $5 million in revenue are different than the rest of the pool. Okay? They are totally different. They tend to be more optimistic. They are more of a business focus, I would say. They're also more likely to participate in some of the learning and development categories that other farmers are not. So it's very crowded over here. But farms over 5 million are the dark line on top. You can see way more likely to participate in learning and development when it applies to strategic planning. Remember last segment we talked about formal risk management plans too. Way more likely to do that. Accounting and finance, it's kind of crowded, but the larger group of farms, more likely to be talking about accounting and finance. way more likely to be in human resources, which makes sense, more likely to have employees. But they also do participate as well in things like production and agronomy, maybe just a little bit less than the rest of the population. So you can kind of see some of the differences there. Here's the other interesting thing about learning and development. If you participate in learning and development, and we've tested this across several of our Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index surveys, if you participate in learning and development, your sentiment is higher. You are more optimistic when it comes to current and future farm financial performance. Okay? You have a better outlook when it comes to what's the future of the ag industry. Okay? So the more farms we get involved in, just participating in a webinar, coming to a one-day conference on a topic it's in their niche and in their wheelhouse, that actually does have a positive effect on how they look at the market. I know there's a lot of people in the room that are really focused on succession planning. Does your farm have a written transition succession plan? And only 37% saying yes. Are you working with any external advisors? 64% saying yes. The number one advisors, if I remember correctly, were accountants and lawyers. Were by far the biggest category when it comes to some of those people. I'm going to ask our panel a little bit about this, and I've got some questions around lack of collaboration when it comes to the succession planning and transition process out there in Canada. Which of the following best describes where your farm is in the process of transition and succession and ownership? 38% saying we're in the middle of it, 25% saying we're just getting started. We have a lot of the industry that is in the middle of this. And as soon as you finish it, those 25% saying we have finished for the time being, there's a good chance they're going to be right back in the middle of it very, very soon. Okay? Because it takes us forever to do this. Because if you look on the right, how many years will it be until the farm has fully completed the transition plan and it relates to ownership? 4 to 6 years, 27%, 7 to 9, 21%. 10 to 15 years, 22%. This is long. Think about the average age of the farmer. What is it, like 56 years old? That's pushing things really back. This is a process that you have to ask, why is it taking so long? Maybe you in the audience have some answers on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and then we're going to bring our panel up, and I've got a bunch of questions for them. So you're listening to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
If you only listen to RealAg Radio, you only get half the picture. For greater insight into the issues that affect farming, tune in to RealAgriculture.com. Crops, livestock, machinery, farm management and the markets, even food and travel. Real Agriculture Online digs deeper into the topics that affect the way you work and live. So get connected today. Read, watch, and listen to the people who know at RealAgriculture.com.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and Prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
We got a great group here. We're at the CAFA meeting in Stratford, Ontario. Beautiful, beautiful area of Ontario. I drove up here this morning from Guelph. It's good to see some corn out of the ground, looking not too bad in this area. There's other areas looking exceptionally not as good. So some of the crops I saw today were definitely not too bad. We're off to a decent start. Not as good as our American friends to the south, where we had, 75% of the U.S. corn crop is rated good to excellent. Only 4% poor to very poor. So they're off to a great start. We'll see how that impacts the markets. Encourage you to go back to Wednesday's episode of RealAg Radio, where we talked to Randolph Glanville from Grain Fox about some of the impacts on the corn and soybean market. Okay, now we've got a panel. Great group. They are brave. They are ready to go. They're sitting here in front of their peers, not to make them any more nervous than they probably already are. Let's go through the panel. They can introduce themselves. Who are you? Who do you represent? And what are some of the things that you do in the industry? So up first, we have Ryan Parker. So Ryan, you're a consultant with Valco. So introduce yourself.
Yeah, so Ryan Parker, I'm a real estate appraiser with Valco. I value farms and agribusiness properties across the province. Family and I have a small cow-calf farm outside of London.
Awesome stuff. Well, welcome. And you've listened to RealAg Radio before.
I have, yeah. That's the only reason I have the membership, I think. That and Prime Country, you can't beat that. 80s and 90s.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Nice work. And we also have Cate McCorquodale. She is a partner with Monteith Ritsma Phillips.
Yes, so I am a partner, a lawyer at Monteith Ritsma Phillips here in Stratford, actually, so a pretty short commute this morning. So I have a very mixed practice. I do family law, I do corporate real estate, wills and estates, and I have lots of farm clients because, I get to do some farm divorces and succession planning and that sort of thing. I grew up on a dairy farm just outside of Stratford and am still involved with that, own some cattle and help out when they need me.
And our third panelist is Tom Blonde. He's an accountant with Baker Tilly. So Tom, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Tom Blondie. I'm a partner with Baker Tilly GWD. I'm based out of Elora, Ontario. My client base is predominantly farmers, about 70%, but not entirely. And I'm involved in taxation, succession planning, financial statements, review engagements, everything to do with a public accounting practice. And my background is growing up on a farm in the Chatham-Kent area, although nowadays I'm not involved in farming anymore. I'm just a farm advisor.
Now, Tom, we were talking about this written succession plan, some of that data, and I think it was 37% have a written plan. You said not surprising.
I'm not surprised at all. And in fact, I'm surprised it's that high because from my personal experience, it's very, very rare to have a written succession plan. You might have a few documents there that are written that are part of that, like a shareholders agreement or a will. But as far as the overall plan for the succession, that's a very rare thing.
Okay, so I think a lot of times, remember in Jerry Maguire, my word is stronger than oak, and how that worked out for Jerry in the movie. Cate, some farmers will say to me, well, I don't need a written plan. I've got it, honestly, I've got it figured out. We know what we're going to do. As a legal professional, a lawyer, is that acceptable? Or give us quickly the, oh boy, of that.
Yes, so again, your comment is not surprising. And usually what happens is one person has that in their head as to what's going to happen, and we have a plan. The issue becomes is if that person isn't around. So usually it's dad or grandpa, this is the plan, we've talked to the accountants, we've talked to the lawyers, this is what we're going to do. But then they haven't done anything and something happens to that person who has it in their head. And then everybody's scrambling to try and figure out what's happening. It is one thing to have it in your head, and we all understand when we're doing succession planning, there are a multitude of factors that are considered. But if it's not in writing, nobody's a mind reader. So it does make everyone's job, everyone's roles more difficult. And in terms of having it written down, we don't need a 50-page document with tabs and schedules and everything, but at least, a framework of what we're working towards.
And Ryan, one of the things I think that makes farm succession challenging, especially when you mix in off-farm kids or adults, is the fact that land values have significantly increased. And if you look at going through Perth County, that's a great example. The increase in land values is substantial, and the larger the pot of the money, that's what people fight about is money.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it makes it extremely difficult for succession planning, shareholder disputes, divorces, all that fun stuff that Cate gets to deal with every day. But we do a very good job in the sector of buying farms by cash flowing and using existing equity and existing cash flow to buy the next farm. And of course, that allows us to buy farms that don't pencil, right? But when you have to then somehow liquidate some of that or pass that to the next generation, it obviously doesn't cash flow, which makes it very, very difficult to be able to transition that to the next generation.
Do you have a sense, or do you want to look into your crystal ball a little bit? Do you think this land value trend of just continuing to go higher happens, or are you concerned at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think, interest rates and crop prices have a big thing to do with it. So Bank of Canada lowers the rate yesterday. So I made the joke earlier that we're going to go on another ride here probably by next week. But no, I mean, I think here in Ontario specifically, where we maybe have some different things at play here than other parts of the country. We got an area where we're at here in Stratford. There's about 6 counties, very high livestock density, and we always have a lot of urban areas that pressure our farmland, right? So I think there's no doubt. I think going forward, we're going to have strong farmland prices.
Had a farmer on RealAg Radio on Thursday, farms in the Fraser Valley. And, to give you an idea, maybe Ontario farmland has some ways to run. Is in the Fraser Valley. He's got a dairy farm, and land is $100,000 an acre.
Yeah, wild. I mean, we think we're special sometimes in Ontario, and the government's not too far away and that kind of thing, and we'll probably hear that out west. But it's, we do have some $40,000, $50,000 plus an acre ground here. But to imagine, the bankers in the room and the accountants, to imagine having a dairy farm that, a dairy farm at $50,000 is tough enough to transition. A dairy farm with $100,000 is a whole other game. So,
and it also becomes increasingly difficult for somebody to try to enter the sector or even just grow the farm that they already have, of course. So, Tom, from a financial standpoint, how should farmers approach investing in things like real estate and to diversify their incomes? Because they're trying to ensure long-term stability. So, what are some of the things they need to consider in that process? Whether it's buying land or maybe it's a different piece of a different side of the operation.
As far as diversifying your portfolio, it's difficult to do when you're farming because of the value of the assets. And the presentation that we saw earlier today, a popular way to expand is to not actually buy those assets, but to lease them. Because then the cash flow does have a chance of working out. If you're buying land at $30,000, $40,000 an acre, it's not going to cash flow. But if you need that space in order to expand your farm, you got to look for other options there. And if you're saving for a retirement as part of a succession plan, so many farmers just throw their investments into farming assets. But because of, again, the extreme value of these assets, more than ever, you should be looking at other options to diversify that investment away from the farm. So traditionally, farmers have not invested much in TFSAs, RSPs. And we were just having the conversation earlier about how things like life insurance, disability insurance, critical illness insurance, none of those things have been that popular in the past with farmers. But I think going forward, the next generation should look at some of these products more carefully to diversify their asset base. And again, given the large value of these assets, give them a better opportunity to transition that to the next generation.
Okay, so good segue to how do you think some of the potential changes when we're talking, we saw in the budget, the capital gains, and we can see some changes there. Do you see that as a negative on the sector when it comes to farm transition?
Yeah, so the more productive farms in Canada are incorporated, and with the announcement in the budget a few weeks ago, and this hasn't been implemented in law yet, it's only been proposed, and we're hoping that we'll get legislation next week. But the way it's been announced so far is that any corporation, from the first dollar of capital gain that you have on any investments that you sell, which would include farmland and quota as well, that will now be subject to a 2/3 inclusion in income versus 50% before. And so the issue with that is that if you were counting on your farm to help pay for your retirement, corporations now have a higher rate of tax. So if you were counting on a certain amount of tax to be paid as part of your retirement plan, this new inclusion rate essentially increases your tax bill by 8%. And the strange thing about what they're proposing here is on the individual basis, you have a $250,000 ability to earn that much capital gain and only have a 50% inclusion rate. But from the first dollar in a company, it's 2/3. So it seems to me that they're penalizing progressive businesses, progressive farmers that are investing in their corporations and using that for their retirement versus individuals here. And it's just one of many things that business owners and farm owners have found frustrating about this current administration here. And I won't get into too much discussion here on politics, but
tell us how you really feel.
Well, again, it's the rural-urban divide, right?
Yep.
Like you point out there, and this is part of it. It seems like the current government is laser focused on a particular demographic that will get them elected, and to the disadvantage of the country, because a lot of the people that are the economic engine of this country are in rural areas. They're not necessarily in those urban areas, right? And we need to strike a better balance, I think, and hopefully going forward, like such a polarized political environment here, and I hope that we get more into a middle ground, because you just have far left and you have far right, and we don't have that middle of the road politics anymore.
Ryan, is there a regulation or a policy issue in your line of work that concerns you, or maybe you see as an opportunity?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, I've always voted one way, which tends to be the color blue. But I said to somebody today, something.
Tends to be?
Tends to be. But I said to somebody, maybe I should switch up, because, Liberals go and make a rule like this, capital gains, and I got real busy for people trying to close their farms by the 24th or 25th of June.
It generated a lot of revenue.
It did. And we don't want the government to go hungry either, right? They got to eat, I guess, for all those. I think Tyler called them internal services. That's the term, right? So, for my business, there isn't a ton. We tend to be, as appraisers, you tend to be watching the market, right? So you're really following the response of farmers, right? So depending on how they buy and what they do, that tends to be how we repeat things when we go to valuations. But anytime that we have a change on tax like that, I mean, we don't have a lot of years in a row usually where we have a lot of leftover cash, a lot of leftover profit in the farm sector. So, picking on capital gains, that was, in a lot of ways, that nest egg that farmers always could count on. So,
okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to ask Cate which regulation, policy issues that she's paying particular attention to. We're at the CAFA meeting here in Stratford, Ontario. We'll be right back. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomist with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights, live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM, brought to you today by the Bossy Nagy Group. Chartered accountants, we can help you surprise yourself. See how you can increase your bottom line. Find out more by going to bng-cpa.ca. We're at the CAFA meeting here in Stratford, Ontario, and this is a very important group. There's a lot of complex issues, financial, insurance, a lot of things that the farmer doesn't necessarily have their head in on a daily basis, because raising livestock, growing crops, and this is the people that are in this organization are the ones that are helping them steer through some of that complexity. So a very, very important group. So I encourage you to check out CAFA if you have not done so. We got a great panel here. We're talking to Ryan Parker. He is with Valco. We got Cate McCorquodale.
McCorquodale.
Okay, how do I say it again?
McCorquodale.
McCorquodale. Sorry, I apologize. She's a partner with Monteith Ritsma Phillips, and we got Tom Blondie, who's an accountant with Baker Tilly. Okay, Cate, you're up. Which regulation policy has you concerned or feeling, pretty optimistic?
So I deal in worst case scenarios every day, so the optimism piece probably...
It's hard for you as a lawyer?
It's hard for me as a lawyer.
Yeah.
But I mean, Tom's comments on the capital gains, there's a little bit of a lag in what we see as lawyers on that, because most people are working with their accountants on tax planning, and those capital gains issues before we see some instructions and kind of take over from there in terms of putting the legal documents together. So I do expect that we will be seeing some changes, some updates to people's plans, transitions. The other thing, we do a lot of real estate. We have had a few, particularly with that capital gain announcement, of people who, changed their plans. Maybe weren't thinking of selling the farm or selling the cottage, who, went, I don't want to pay that extra tax, so, we're going to sell it. And I mean, it's going to, tax is always impacting, kind of everything we do in terms of succession planning, family law. So we're always paying attention to that to help advise our clients.
So, Brian, when we look at some of the the market dynamics that are out there and some of the things that farmers are experiencing, I showed earlier the current and future farm financial performance and how farmers are kind of negative here right now, but we continue to see the investment in land. Does sometimes, and I know they're not making more of it, but what I hear a lot from the audience is, doesn't pencil, don't get it. Why does it keep going up?
Yeah, I mean, sentiment's never too negative to buy your neighbor's farm. I mean, they're always happy to do that. But it's, I think it's something that's always been said to buyers, right? It's been as long as I've been doing this, probably as long as history. You get told one day that you paid too much and that was a dumb buy, and about 2 years later, you're a genius at the coffee shop, right? Because you own a farm that's worth a third of what it's worth now. So I think that repetition, I mean, especially with certain producers who are buying farms, every couple of years, and they're always told that, you start to hear that and go, this sounds like the same story again, which I'm going to come out a hero, and for the last 15, 20 years, that's been the case, right? So I think in a way that puts us to sleep, but that's really the mentality.
I'm curious, and anybody on the panel can tackle this, do we see there being a greater percentage of farmland rented in the future? Does anybody have an opinion on that?
I would say yes, because part of the reason why the prices are as high as they are is supply and demand, and there's a lot of demand, or a lot more demand than there is supply, and there's a lot more investment in farmland where it's not farmers that are investing in those properties, right? So maybe more of the farmland will be owned by either retired farmers or people that aren't farmers at all, and that's how they'll cash flow it by renting it out.
Right?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that possibility. It all depends who buys these farms, right? But a lot of the farms that have been purchased the last 15 years especially, a lot of those farms were older people who had quit farming who are renting their farm out, right? And so a lot of those farms were bought by ongoing producers who bought those farms to operate themselves. So, some of that has been replaced by our institutional investors that have bought land. But in general, I think if you were to add it up from now to 10, 15 years ago, I bet you the numbers are that we have more producers owning and farming that land instead of renting.
When we were talking about succession earlier, one thing I didn't ask that I wanted to follow up on, Cate, is I want to make sure that people don't think when I say, only 37% of farms have a written, or less, have a written formal succession plan. Sometimes people say, well, we're trying to kind of picking on the farmer, but I would hazard to guess, and you correct me if I'm wrong, this is an entrepreneur issue across other industries as well. Is that what you kind of see at the firm?
I mean, I deal mostly with farmers in terms of the business side of things, but I think, entrepreneurs and farmers themselves are entrepreneurs, they're focusing on running their business. And they're focusing on the day-to-day and that sort of thing. And everyone gets to a point where a decision is made, right? You either have a successor or you don't. And so, I think it's kind of human nature. It's a little bit like why people don't come in and see me and do their wills, because you don't want to think about that date when you're not a farmer, when you're not an entrepreneur. And the thing is, again, succession planning is not, and Shaun, one of your slides had this, it's not, kind of we go through the plan and then there's a finite date and we're done. Right? There's always that next piece, and lots of people are doing it in steps, right? So, you're bringing one child on, and then, you kind of go through a few years of that, and then the next child, is coming on. So it's an evolving process, and it's not like a start and stop event, which I think some people think it is. So in terms of, what people think of as a written succession plan, I think if you kind of looked at some people and said, okay, well, do you have a plan for like this step, step 1, 2, and 3, you might get a different answer.
Do you think we're getting better at it?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, why?
I think education of the next generation, right? Previous generations, it was, the farm went from dad to son when dad died. And, people are living longer. Some farmers, not all farmers, do retire. And, we're, living longer. So, we don't have, there's a longer time where families multi-generations are working together. And I just, as the business of farming becomes more complex, people are realizing, we can't do it on a handshake, and we can't do it on, dad's will on his, the day after he dies.
And there is a difference between ownership transition and management transition. Those
Absolutely.
are two different things, and I hopefully we're making some progress there. Tom, when it comes to whether it's transition planning, maybe it's strategic planning, one of the frustrations I have is that, if we look at people that are advising farmers in some of these areas, are we collaborating enough amongst the advisors? Because what I see in my personal experience in our operation when we were going through that was that you talk in individual conversations all the time, and it was a game of telephone, and that also lengthens the process to get to some sort of completion. So talk about collaboration.
Yeah, definitely it is important. I think for collaboration to be successful, you need somebody that you're using as a quarterback for the situation. So if you're dealing with somebody in isolation, you should establish that pretty much right away, and maybe not have that person be that quarterback. Like you need to deal with somebody that is going to work organically with your other advisors, whether they be an investment advisor, lawyer, and accountant, because obviously if you work all together, things will move quicker. You'll come up with a plan that is a better plan at the end of the day.
Okay, so what's the most difficult thing about being a farm advisor?
The most difficult thing is dealing with, well, personally, the family dynamic, because sometimes they're coming to you and what they really need is a psychologist or somebody that deals in the social sciences rather than
an accountant?
Like myself, right? Because
when I think of a therapist, I don't think of an accountant.
With their marriage, their kids, their kids' spouses, and that's the stuff that they need to get sorted out first before the succession plan. And then oftentimes, and we were talking about this earlier as well, there's a lack of communication where the founders of the business have one plan in mind, and they think that everybody else thinks the same way, and they come to you and they get going on this plan, and you try to encourage them to, bring the family around the table. And I learned that from an early stage when I was partner, that I don't let them run with it. Like, I bring in the kids into those meetings first thing so that I get their opinion, and have a meeting with them on their own, away from their parents as well.
Yeah, in our research, younger generation thinks the biggest barrier to farm succession is communication or lack thereof. The older generation, it's financial. It's taxes, upfront costs, things like that. Kate, what's the most difficult thing about being a farm advisor?
I'm going to echo Tom, because the emotional piece, the family dynamic piece of it. I mean, advisors, we can do the tax planning, we can do the legal documents, but if you haven't sorted out the rest of it, like, what we do isn't going to be successful. You're going to pay us to do a plan that's not going to work.
Okay, Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, I think I got a lot less problems than the lawyers and accountants, because I only kind of in and out. I do my appraisal and leave, so the problems I have to listen to, they're usually only about an hour, and it's not usually that bad. So I leave that for the other advisors, the ones that are smarter than I am. But on another note, I think the one thing to keep in mind, as a sector, is it's a huge opportunity, and it's a wonderful thing that our sector's built in family business, right? And that ability to be able to succession the next generation is really an opportunity, I think, more than it is a hurdle, and a lot of times that's kind of the way we think of it. And my only other note would be I think partly it's a misleading stat, the average age of farmers, right? So I think probably today, I bet you 75% of our presentations were talking about 56 or 58 being the average age, and how old that's getting. But I think it's more to do, I think it's a misleading stat. I think it's more to do with where the sector has changed, right? So the sector has went to larger farms, which take longer to succession plan, which means that older generation is owning the farm longer than the past generations did. And I think that kind of leads to an older ownership. But what I see, at least here in Ontario, with a lot of my travels, is a whole bunch of youth coming back to the farm, which I think is a really good thing.
Well, and it's a great sector. Like, we have challenges, right? We have issues. We have things that are in front of us that are no doubt concerning. We've talked about a lot of issues here today at this CAFA meeting that, yes, are a concern. But honestly, I can't think of a better industry to be in. This is truly, truly a great industry, and it's been great to be here with the CAFA members here today. Like I said, the group that is trying to help farmers through some really difficult complexities. And I think it's a really, really important role. Clearly, by what we heard, we need more people, like therapists or psychologists, helping us through some of these things. But that's okay too, because that's an important. The softer part of all of this is also important. Building trust in any sort of negotiation or business deal is very, very important. So I think it's a big lesson from today. So Tom, Ryan, Kate, really appreciate you being brave enough to come up here. If anybody has any feedback on today's show, they can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the social media platforms, or you can call the RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks very much to CAFA for having us here today. Really do appreciate it. And of course, thank you so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio, and we will see you again next week. Cheers, everybody.